Bring it back together.
Yes.
Pause.
Spell it.
Jeremiah.
T-O-S-I.
I said spell it. I-T.
Alright, remember that the expectation in this class. Remember that we set norms in this class to respect other people when they're talking. Part of what that looks like is paying attention when people speak and not making comments about them. So for the rest of the class, let's make sure that we maintain those expectations.
Yes, sir.
Alright, so the reason I started with this, I always like to make our small talks relevant to the class. So today we are discussing characters, and we're going to be looking at the way that characters' actions and words help us understand who they are. So before that, I'd like to make sure that we're all ready to start. So like always, on the screen you have the red box for materials and the blue box for the homework. So today's homework is to finish classwork. What that means is if you finish everything in class today, you will not have anything to do tonight.
Yeah.
For materials, what it says up here is that you need your book and your journal. So if you have not taken those out already, go ahead and do that right now.
I am mad because I wrote that whole thing for no reason.
I'll give you this.
I spent time going to bed looking for what her mama said. And her mama barely talked that book. This is why I don't do my homework.
Alright, so you just need to go.
Yeah, so you gotta respect others' words.
Alright, so here's a little preview of what we're doing today. Very nice. So our objective for class is to get to know the narrator of the story by analyzing the text in a graphic organizer and then creating an outline. So exactly like we've been doing before, we're going to read a little bit and then we're going to do a little bit of independent work. And then like I said before, one thing I like to do is I like to give a purpose or a why for each lesson. So the reason I'm super excited about today's class is because characterization is the skill we use to understand who people are. So in real life, being able to take what people say and how people act is an important skill to understanding the people around us. So that's a skill that I use at work, it's a skill I use in school, and it's a skill that I use in making new relationships and friendships with other people. So this is an example of a class that is going to be really relevant and useful to your everyday experience. All right, so I'm going to introduce a little change. Same picture as always.
Why did you do that?
But what y'all have been used to is we had some time for independent reading, and we also had some time for answering questions. We're going to keep that structure, but one change we're going to do is I really want to spend some time in the book with you guys, so we're going to be reading together as a group. That's going to be a little change.
We're going to do popcorn.
We're going to do that, but today I'm just going to read the passage to y'all. So before we do that, I'm going to give a little content warning for the class today. So the passage we're reading contains the use of the N-word. Of course, I'm not going to say the N-word, but it's going to...
Don't say it. Nobody will say it.
All right, bring it back. Bring it back together.
Nobody's gonna say it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nobody. No matter what you say on your own time.
All right, so... All right, let's bring it back together. That means everyone should have their voices off. And that everyone should put their eyes up here.
Ladies.
And the second thing that this passage covers is it references lynching, which is a form of racial violence that we'll talk about in a little bit. But if either of these topics are things that you are uncomfortable with covering in class, then you can step out into the hallway with Miss Davis, and we can give you another section of the text to work with instead. But we're going to start by reading together. So if you would like to sit on the floor or one of the couches to follow along closer to me, then you can do that. Today is just going to be me. We'll do a little more fun reading. All right. So find a spot in 5, 4, 3,
I need
2. You should be silent and seated in 1. All right, at this point, everyone should be seated with their book.
You didn't buy that chair. It's not a recliner.
And then I'm going to start when everyone's voices are off and everyone is ready to start.
Miss Davis, your mic took off the speaker.
All right, so right now there are 4 voices I hear. There's still 3 voices that I hear.
It's all them females.
There's still 1 more voice that I hear. I need everyone to put their voices off and their eyes up here. Thank you. All right, so I mentioned this idea of lynching. Before we get into the passage, we're going to give you a little bit of historical context so that everyone starts on the same page. So this is why I started with that content warning so that I could warn y'all in advance. Okay, so if I had to define what lynching is a public killing or execution. It's always performed by a mob, which is this big group of people, and it's always done without a trial. So this is against the law. This is an example of a mob taking action to do something outside of the law. So the reason we're talking about this is because from before the Civil War until the most recent lynching, which was in 1981, this was something that happened very often all over the United States. It's something that also affected the book. So the reasoning is that many white people who performed these lynchings blamed their economic and their social problems on the fact that we had all these slaves who were suddenly free. So especially in the 100 years from around 1882 to 1981, there were thousands of black people in the United States who were killed for supposed crimes. Another thing to notice is that it wasn't just black people, but there were over 1,000 white people who were also killed through mob violence because mostly they were accused of either helping a black person accused of a crime or they spoke out against lynching altogether. So this wasn't just unique to black people, but there were over 1,000 white people who were also lynched as well. So lynching served 2 purposes. First, if the white community felt that there was a crime done, then they would take justice into their own hands and act outside the law. The second purpose was that lynching scared black people away from voting and it prevented them from organizing. So this was a political tool that people use in order to prevent the African American community from organizing themselves. So to give you a little more context before I open it up for questions, I'm going to show you a map. So this is a really cool project.
Is that KKK?
That's really, we'll talk about that.
Oh.
So, I'll turn off this light so you can see a little clearer.
My back hurts from turning.
Kaylin and Paris. So if you take a look at this map, these are all of the cases of lynchings that we know of, the ones that are recorded. So let's take a look. What are some things you notice about where these things occurred? Josh?
They're in southern regions.
Nice, so it happens quite a bit in the south. But one other thing I can notice is that it also happened pretty often up north as well. So even though the majority of cases happen down here, this was a problem all over the United States. One other important piece of information is that these are only the cases that we know about. That means that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other cases that weren't recorded that also happened as well. The reason we know about these cases is because many times what the mobs would do is after they finished killing this person, they would all gather together and take a picture. And there are actually cases where towns would create postcards of the pictures that people would take with their victims. So that's part of the reason why we know about a lot of these cases is because they were talked about pretty openly. So, now that we have that kind of historical understanding, do y'all have any questions about what we've talked about just now? Emmanuel.
So it is related to the KKK.
So the question was, is this related to the KKK? So the Ku Klux Klan is an organization that is like, it's full of these people called white supremacists,
Yeah.
and they were a group that were heavily involved in making these lynchings happen. Other questions?
No, sir.
Okay, so the reason I introduced this is because the passage we are going to read today discusses this topic. And I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same kind of basis of understanding related to that. So, like always, we are going to read, and then eventually you are going to answer 3 questions together. So, you don't have to answer them now, but I want to show them to you so that you can be thinking about them in advance. So the questions are, what happened with the sheriff? Jacqueline and Paris. Question B is, how did Margaret feel about the situation? And question C is, how would you have reacted in this situation? So we're going to read this together, and as you're reading, I hope that you keep these questions in mind, because that'll save you a lot of work later on. Alright, so if everyone could open their books up to page 17, I'll know you're ready when your finger is on the word late one day in the middle of the page.
Page 17.
Page 17, late one day, it's like the second paragraph. It's going to be me today, but we'll popcorn in the future.
But I can read.
Oh, you said where?
Page 17, the second paragraph, it says late one day.
Alright.
All right. Gotta make myself comfortable. All right, so I'm going to start from that middle of the page. Make sure everyone is following along and ready to go.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So it says, late one day as we were attending to the pigs, I heard a horse in the front yard. It really should have been called a driveway, except that there was nothing to drive into it, and ran out to find who had come riding up on a Thursday evening, when even Mr. Stewart, the quiet, bitter man who owned a riding horse, would be resting by his warm fire until the morning called him out to turn over his field. The used-to-be sheriff sat rakishly astraddle his horse. By rakishly astraddle, what that means is he's sitting kind of sideways, he's kind of slouching, kind of swaggering a little bit, because he wants to sit on his horse in a way that makes him look cool.
Alright.
His nonchalance was meant to convey his authority and his power over even dumb animals. How much more capable he would be with Negroes, it went without saying. His twang jogged in the brittle air. From the side of the store, Bailey and I heard him say to Mama, "Annie, tell Willie he better lay low tonight. A crazy N-word messed with a white lady today. Some of the boys will be coming over here later." Even after the slow drag of years, I remember the sense of fear which filled my mouth with hot, dry air and made my body light. So I'm going to pause there. And the question I have is, what is the sheriff doing at their house? Let's see a hand for that. Kiara, what is
Trying to
the
be cool.
He's trying to be cool, nice. And what is he telling the family? Wait, so let's see a hand, Dinesh.
Willie to lay low.
Yes, why is he telling Willie to lay low?
He was messing with a white lady or something.
So not him specifically, but he's saying that someone else in town is being accused of messing with a white lady, and that there's going to be a mob coming out to look for this person. So what he's doing is he's warning them that if Uncle Willie is outside, the mob might come after him too.
Wow.
All right, so I'm going to keep reading from the boys at the very bottom of the page. So let's make sure everyone is on that, ready to go. All right, so I'll read that last sentence again to kind of get us back in the groove. Even after the slow drag of years, I remember the sense of fear which filled my mouth with hot, dry air and made my body light. The boys, those cement faces and eyes full of hate that burn the clothes off you if they happen to see you lounging on the main street downtown on Saturday. Boys, it seemed that youth had never happened to them. Boys, no. Rather men who were covered with grave's dust and age without beauty or learning, the ugliness and rottenness of old abominations. If on Judgment Day I was summoned by St. Peter to give testimony to the used-to-be sheriff's act of kindness, I would be unable to say anything in his behalf. His confidence that my uncle and every other black man who heard of the Klan's coming ride would scurry under their houses to hide in chicken droppings was too humiliating to hear. Without waiting for Mama's thanks, he rode out of the yard, sure that things were as they should be, and that he was a gentle squire, saving those deserving serfs from the laws of the land which he condoned. A squire is like someone who owns a bunch of land, and the serfs are the peasants who work on that land. All right, so my question here, I'm going to pause again, is what does the sheriff think about his action of warning the family? What does he think about himself in this passage? We'll go to Paris.
He's like a hero.
He thinks that he's a hero. You want to build on that, Jacqueline?
He has the appetite.
He thinks that it's an act of kindness. Very nice. And Dinesh, you want to add on to that too? We already kind of covered it.
Yeah.
Nice. So my second question is, we have the sheriff who thinks that he's doing this great heroic action. What does Marguerite think about it instead? She's the person. She's the narrator. So my voice, that's Marguerite's voice.
Oh, Marguerite. He was a
What?
gentle squire.
So that one I'll push back a little bit because I think the sheriff thinks that he is a gentle squire. But it's slightly before that. If you look at the paragraph that starts, if on Judgment Day, that'll tell you what Marguerite is thinking in this moment.
So Margarita said, so she wanted.
So the passage is saying, if she was summoned to tell St. Peter about the sheriff's act of kindness, then what would she say?
Oh, she said.
I would be unable to say anything like his.
Very nice. And what does that mean? Like, if you had to rephrase that, what would you say, Jada?
You don't have nothing to say about it.
Exactly. She has nothing good to say. Very nice. So we can see that there's kind of a disconnect. We have the sheriff. Who thinks that he's doing this great act of kindness. But at the same time, we have Marguerite who says that she disagrees, that if she had to say something nice about him, she wouldn't be able to say anything. All right, so we're going to finish the passage. We're at the paragraph that starts immediately in the middle of the page. All right, so it says, immediately, while his horse's hoofs were still loudly thudding the ground, Mama blew out the coal oil lamps. She had a quiet, hard talk with Uncle Willie and called Bailey and me into the store. We were told to take the potatoes and onions out of their bins and knock out the dividing walls that kept them apart. Then, with a tedious and fearful slowness, Uncle Willie gave me his rubber-tipped cane and bent down to get into the now enlarged empty bin. It took him forever before he lay down flat, and then we covered him with potatoes and onions, layer upon layer like a casserole. Grandmother knelt praying in the darkened store. It was fortunate that the boys didn't ride into our yard that evening and insist that Mama open the store. They would have surely found Uncle Willie and just as surely lynched him. He moaned the whole night, though, as if he had, in fact, been guilty of some heinous crime. Heinous means terrible. So Uncle Willie in this moment is crying out as if he is guilty, even though he's not. The heavy sounds pushed their way up out of the blanket of vegetables, and I pictured his mouth pulling down on the right side, and his saliva flowing into the eyes of new potatoes, and waiting there like dewdrops for the warmth of morning. All right, so that passage we just finished reading together. So actually, let me get a little straw poll. Do you feel like you got a stronger understanding of the passage because we read it together?
Yes.
So is this something that we should do more often?